Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. On my channel we talk about all things art and we do some fun unboxing of art supplies. And you've seen me do Sketchbox before. Well, this is Muse Kit. So this is like Sketchbox. They do a monthly subscription kit, but they'll do the same thing where the kit from previous months, they will go and have them on sale until they sell out. This one, I don't know if it's sold out or not yet. I will link it below. I'm sorry if it has sold out, but they probably have some other kits available. This one's not a grab bag or anything. I know what's in here. This is the water soluble oil paints. I'm having a hard time saying oil paints today. So the thing about water soluble oil paints is they've been out since the 80s, and I first tried them in the 90s sometime, and I'll be honest, I didn't like them. Now, it could have been I wasn't using them right. There was only one brand available and they were still fairly new to the market. I don't think there was even, the art supply store in my town didn't have very many options when it came to media. I tried using them with linseed oil and tried using them regular oil paints, and they just got sticky and gummy and never really wanted to dry. Well, now other brands have come out with their own versions, and now they've come out with special linseed oils for them and specialty medias for them, and a lot of people swear that they're just as good as regular oil paints. And so I wanted to give them another try. So this isn't my first time using them, but I will almost say I guess it would be, because this is the first time using this brand. So I know what brand comes in here. This is Cobra, which is a brand that a lot of people swear by. They say it's so much better. Other people say you can't tell the difference between brands. Like I said, I did try Winsor & Newton years and years ago, but again, it was before all the other additives and things like that. So I will be trying this out and comparing it to regular oil paints. And you might be thinking, well, why not just use regular oil paints? What are the benefits of water soluble oil paints? Well, there's several. One, the fumes of oil paints. It's not the oil paints that get off the fumes, it's the additives that you're using. It's the paint thinners, the liquid that you use, or the terpene oil, things like that. And you can use these in well ventilated areas. My problem is I have birds, and birds have very sensitive respiratory systems. I have respiratory issues, one of the reasons why I always sound out of breath and raspy. But with my birds, I wanted safety come first for them, and I didn't want to be using any kind of harsh chemicals anywhere around them. I paint a lot in my living room. One of my birds is in my living room. I didn't want to have to move her every single time I wanted to work on a painting. And so I was worried about the effects on her. So I started oil painting again, and I absolutely remember how much I loved oil painting after not doing it for 20 years since I was in art school. And so I wanted to try something, and water soluble oil paint is the way to go. So we're going to try painting with these, and this little booklet here tells you a little bit about them, a little instruction booklet, and then it comes with some stickers, comes with a nice acrylic palette, it comes with, of course, the oil paints themselves, the Cobra brand water soluble oil paints, comes with a brush washer, comes with canvas panel, comes with 4 canvas panels, a little bag of tea, which I love hot tea. It comes with a nice set of brushes. This one has a large oval wash brush, a filbert, which is one of my favorite shapes, a shader, a round, and a script brush. You can see that sit there, and a nice set of palette knives, which is good because I could only find 2 of my palette knives the other day. So we will give this set a try, and then like I said, I will compare it to regular oil paint, and you can mix these as well. For me, it's a matter of the fumes, but if it's something you just want something easier to clean up, but you still want to use your regular oil paints, you can use these, not completely interchangeably, but you can use these with your oil paints. Of course, you can't mix your other oil paints with water, but these can mix onto a painting. It's not like trying to mix oil and acrylic where one will dry faster than the other. Now, I did already buy, because Joann's Fabrics is going out of business and I'm finding great things on clearance, I did buy this full set of Cobra water mixable oil paints there at Joann's for really inexpensive, less than I paid for this whole kit. So I've got a lot of colors to choose from, a lot of colors to play with, and then I went over to Michael's and got some of the medias. You don't have to have this. You can use these with just water. Like I said, when I tried them in the past, I tried regular linseed oil, tried water, didn't really work. This is a special linseed oil that has been made specifically for the water mixable oil paint. So it's supposed to be less tacky, It dries a little differently. Everything I've heard about this one, it works great with it. It doesn't do that weird gummy tackiness that regular linseed oil does. And then this one is basically, it improves the flow. This is called the painting medium. This is by Winsor & Newton as well, made for water mixable oil paints. And of course you can use water mixable oil paints, any brand. They're all compatible. I believe, I forget the other brands. There's I think 2 other brands that make water mixable oil paints now. I think Gambin, I forget the name of the company. And there's, I think Holbein also makes water mixable oil paints. If I'm not, I may be wrong. But I will, if it exists, I'll link everything down below in the description. I might be wrong, but I think they do. And I'll probably try some other brands. I still have some Winsor & Newton. I bought new ones because I don't know what happened to the stuff I tried before, but I bought some new Winsor & Newton ones, and I will compare the Cobra with the Winsor & Newton, but I did get the correct media to try. So I'll try it with this, I'll try it with water. We'll see which works best and see how they compare. So we're gonna go try to do a painting with these. So sorry for not showing the sketch on this one. I didn't realize I had my camera in the wrong spot and it didn't show the sketch at all. And this is on a gessoed 8x8 canvas that I painted this owl on. I started with just water and didn't do any of the medias right at first. And also, even though I was going to demonstrate the Cobra brand paint, the set did not come with black, and which I know you can mix your own black by adding different colors, but it always turns out a little muddy, and I wanted a true rich black. So I ended up using, I had a tube, you can see there at the bottom, of the water mixable Winsor & Newton oil paint. So I tried that one first, and I did black with just a little bit of green. And I will say, one thing I noticed right away is the black and the green didn't really want to mix together very well. And that might be just that they were different brands. I'm not sure. Their formula might be a little different. Or it might have just been the way I was mixing. Maybe I didn't add enough water. The 2 colors just odd, and how they almost wanted to separate from each other at first. And finally got them mixed. In hindsight, I probably should have done an acrylic underpainting. I did want to just demo these oil paints though, so I didn't want to do anything else with them. But going back, if I use these again, I will definitely do an acrylic underpainting, especially if I want a nice rich black background. I'd probably just do black gesso on the canvas and start from there, or tone my canvas down and do an underpainting for the owl as well, which I did not do here. And normally with oil paints, you would start from dark to light. But with this being a barn owl and the bird being such a light color kind of overall, and the way the feathers lay, I did a little bit differently than I normally would to blend the colors. And I will say these water mixable oil paints are surprising because they do behave just like oil paints. They're very creamy. They blend and mix very well. I had doubts because, like I said before, I had tried the Winsor & Newton back in the 90s and I just did not like it. Here I was still using water. Eventually I do try the actual blending media. I will say though, when I opened the blending media, it had a very strong odor to it, almost like a paint thinner odor. So I didn't use it again because the whole reason I was trying to use these oil paints was to get rid of fumes and to have something that's safe to use around my birds. So instead, I switched to the linseed oil that was specially made for these oil paints. In hindsight, I kind of poured too much onto my palette. I probably should have had something to measure it out a little bit better, so it was a little messy, but it did help the paint to flow a little bit better and blend the colors better. I did not notice the tackiness that I'd had in the past, and it didn't seem like it was causing the paint to dry any faster. And here I'm still just adding the tan color of the owl's body. Okay, and we'll speed this up just a little bit because this is just laying down the base color of the owl's body, and it's kind of a tawny brown. And here I've mixed just a little bit of linseed oil to make it more of a wash. And I will say one difference of this I'm noticing between normal oil paints is it doesn't take as much to thin it down Like with normal oil paints, I would use liquid or linseed oil, and it would take quite a bit to get a thin wash. This one, it just takes like a couple of drops, so something to keep in mind when working with these. And then going back with just a little bit darker color to paint in some of those feathers and the darker color around the eyes. Barn owls have a really interesting color pattern, and they look from the front almost solid white, but then they've got these really cool different tawny browns and grays on their back and on their wings, and really interesting color around their face. And this is actually, I think, the first time I have ever painted a barn owl. Actually, this may be the first time I've ever painted an owl, honestly, which is surprising because I actually love these birds. I've worked with owls before in the past and had a barred owl, had a couple of barn owls too when I was a wildlife rehabber, so kind of surprised that I haven't done more owl artwork as much as I love them. And I collect owls, and so did my grandmother. When she passed away, I inherited her giant owl collection, so I've got owls all over my house and multiple owl things, so it's weird that I've never painted one. Okay, and we'll speed this up again, just painting in a little bit darker browns. And this again did a little different than going from dark to light on this one, just because of the way the owl's colors lie. And then taking a smaller brush and painting in the blacks of the eyes. And not all artists do this, but I remember hearing an artist say to paint the eyes last so you're not distracted by them. But I'm kind of the opposite. I almost like to paint the eyes in first so it gives the painting some life, so I kind of know what I'm trying to achieve, if that makes sense, or what kind of creature I'm trying to paint. And you'll see me do that even in my digital artwork. You'll see me like blocking all the colors, and one of the first things I'll go and finish a lot of times is the eye. I don't know why I do that. That's just something I've always done. You know, you can do however you want. If you do the eye last, then great. If you think it distracts you, if you do it first. But for me, it's always one of those things that kind of brings the painting to life. So here it's just adding brown, and I thinned it down again with the linseed oil that was made for the water mixable oil paints. I didn't really notice a difference in viscosity of the linseed oil. I did notice it has no odor to it at all, which is nice. So that was another benefit to this compared to regular oil paints. And I want to say sorry about the glare on the painting. I wasn't even thinking about that when I set up where my light was at. I was trying to make it where I wasn't casting a shadow, but unfortunately you can see what my hand still is. And then every time I get my hand back in view, the camera wants to focus on that. And then I've got my other light set up where wet oil paint was making a very bad glare. So didn't think about that beforehand, so sorry about that. I promise I will get better at this whole video editing and recording. Still getting used to where to set everything up and the best lighting to use and things like that. Not really used to that. But here I'm just going back with black paint and a smaller brush to do the details around the eyes. And I will start, and you can even really see here, yeah, because of the glare, you cannot tell that there is kind of a white creamy color on the face. I didn't leave the face just white. It kind of looks like it is, but there is some color to it. And then painting the beak. Barn owls have almost a pink colored beak. It's an interesting color and a really interesting shape. And at first I actually make it too curved, almost like a parrot's or hookbill. So I do go back and change the shape of the beak later. And then I adjust the shape of the head a little bit too, and you'll see that later on. The nice thing about oil paints is they're very forgiving, so if there's something you don't like, you just paint over it and adjust it. The downside to oil paints, though, is, they take a while to dry, so if you're impatient, acrylics might be a better thing to work with. But so far, these water soluble oil paints, they do feel almost like something in between oils and acrylics. They're not drying fast, which is nice. Like everything in my palette is still wet, but at this point, like if I was doing this as an acrylic painting, if I was just using a regular palette, the paint would probably be dry. If I was using like my Stay Wet palette or something like that, I'd be okay. But I definitely would have some dry acrylic paint by now. And this one, the paint is still, it's been sitting for a couple of days now, and the paint on my palette is still wet. And just the blendability is so much, it's like oil paints. I mean, it's so much different than acrylic. And you can see a little bit better here the like light tan color that I used on the face, and I'm just building up layers of color around the face and neck. Alright, we'll just speed this up, and this is just laying down another layer of the like off-white on the face and neck and everything. And in hindsight, I probably should have just laid this color down first, but I wasn't really thinking about it. I was kind of distracted on trying to blend the colors on the back. At least try those colors out and see how they blended. And I'm using just a filbert brush here to add this color. For some reason in the video, I don't know why, it looks very green. It's probably the green from the background that's kind of giving it that illusion. But it is not green, it is off-white. And just blending that color in to the back as well to kind of give those little wispy feathers down there around the wing and the neck. And some of this color does appear on the back. There's a few little lighter areas of feathers, and of course we'll just build that up more and more with varying layers. And then from here you'll be able to really tell when we go from dark to light and start adding in highlights, which is when start getting the fun part, when you start getting the underpainting done and then start getting the details. And then here adding in details around the beak. And that beak does have a little bit of gray in it to that kind of pink color, so just adding in some gray and kind of defining that beak a little bit more with a smaller brush. And it's, again, the paint is still wet on the canvas, so blending it is very easy. And still everything is behaving just like oil paints would. And I don't think at this point, I think there's still some linseed oil on my palette, but I wasn't using very much at all. This was just using the paint and water. And honestly, given the options, I really do like it with just water. It seems to work the best, and it would make the paint flow better. And owls have these little tiny like wispy feathers around their beak and on their face that almost look more like hair than feathers. So here I'm just starting to build those up. And then building up a little more detail and feathers around the eyes. You can't really see it here, but I'm adding in the lower eyelid and some feathers around the eyes and a little more detail, but unfortunately because of that glare it does make it really hard to see, and sorry about that. And here with a smaller brush I just start adding in the little wispy feathers. Like I said, they've got these just very cool feathers that look so much like hair that move different directions. They come to kind of like a little center point in their forehead, almost like they have like a little mohawk going down right in between their eyes. And then they've got the ones that sit around their beak and around their eyes, and then all their feathers like curve around their face to make that like satellite dish cone of what their feathers do. And if you didn't know, owls, the round feathers on their face, which I forget the name of it now, but it basically works like a satellite dish and helps them capture sound. And barn owls are really unique in that one of their ears is offset from the other to hear more sounds. So they're pretty amazing animals, and they can control all of their feathers, so they can puff up different feathers on their face. And you'll see, I've seen barn owls before sit and puff those feathers up and have like a solid ring, and it's very unusual looking. They have this just round heart-shaped face. And again, just going back and adding more and more detail. And here I started to add in some shadow. I try never to go like truly black, because you just don't really see a lot of like true black in nature, but there are some pretty dark shadows that these feathers create. So giving that, I do go for like a nice gray and just slowly build up the areas that the feathers cast a shadow. And here adding shadow underneath the feathers of the neck, and this one I do build up in several layers. I start light gray and then keep adding more layers to get it darker. So this one I do kind of backwards for oil paints. You normally wouldn't do it this way, but it worked with these, like I said, because these seem to want to work a little differently than oil paints. So this is almost kind of a more watercolor technique here, doing the shadows this way, but just slowly building them up and then following that shape and form of the feathers on the neck. Okay, so we'll speed this up, and same thing here again, just building up layers and layers. And I wish you could see it, but because of the lighting, you really can't. Here I'm going back with kind of going in between the darker gray for shadows, and I'm also going back and doing a lighter white for highlights to really build up those feathers. But unfortunately, because of the glare and like the angle, really cannot tell. It doesn't look like I've done much, but just keep building up more layers. And this is also where I decide to change the shape of the beak, because I do realize that I kind of made it look more like a parrot and less like an owl. And if you ever look at the skull of an owl, they're really unusual. Like their skulls are shaped the same as like a hawk or any other bird of prey, but the way they sit at a dramatic angle, so that's what gives that look of having that very flat face. So their beaks just kind of go like straight down, and even though they do have a curve and a hook to them, it doesn't really look like it because of the way their skull angles. So yeah, if you ever look at an owl skeleton, they're very unusual looking. So yeah, go look up pictures of owl skeletons. You're welcome. They look very alien-like. And then here, just adding more detail to feathers around the top of the head. And here I'm just adding more shadow underneath the cone of feathers around the face, because that cone of feathers around the edge does have stiffer feathers, so it makes that edge pretty distinct and a nice sharp edge. And then we'll go ahead and speed this up a little bit, because this is just me building up more shadows, and it does look quite dark here at some points, but I do go back and blend all of that shadow in. Again, doing this a little differently than I would do most oil paintings. Instead of working from dark to light, I can work from light to dark, just because I was just doing it a little bit differently, just because the colorations of the barn owl. Going back, I probably shouldn't have done it this way. It did make it a little bit more difficult, but because these do blend so well, it's nice, because I just end up blending all the colors out and end up getting a really nice shadow. Most of this bird from the reference picture, the right side was pretty heavily shadowed. And we'll speed this up again, because still same thing, still just building up more shadows using a nice cool gray to get the shadows in there, and then adding a little bit of shadow around the wing as well. And some other cool, interesting facts about barn owls is they have silent flight. They've got these specialized little like fringy feathers on their wings that give them the ability to fly silently. So it's really cool. It's also kind of freaky though, because when I had my rescue, you wouldn't know like where they were at in the cage because you couldn't hear them fly up to the edge. And like I said before about their offset ears and their faces kind of being like satellite dishes, they hunt almost completely by sound, which is really cool. So they can like pinpoint a rodent really far away by hearing that rodent. They also don't hoot like other owls or like that typical sound you think of with an owl hooting. They actually make more like little screeching noises and clicks and things like that. And they're actually really talkative birds, especially in captivity. They will communicate with different sounds and clicks and hisses, and it's really interesting to interact because because they have such good muscle control in their face, can actually show different facial expressions, and will do that with humans. It's very fascinating just how expressive they can be with their face and then their sounds and everything. They also do that with other owls because these guys mate for life and have a couple of different like mating rituals. And if you didn't know this about owls, but they swallow their prey whole and they cough up something called an owl pellet. And you may have had, like in high school, had to dissect one of these. I know I had to, and I know I had to dissect one in college too. But basically it's just a little clump of fur with all the undigested bones and things like that. It's pretty fascinating. So you'll get like a little ball with little mice skulls and stuff like that in it. And it was kind of a thing. I remember we had to dissect it in my biology class in high school, and then again when I was going to school for pre-veterinary medicine in my lab class, we dissected a couple of owl pellets. And a lot of people get the wrong impression and think it comes out the other end, but no, it's something that they actually swallow and then regurgitate because they don't digest the bones, and they don't have a crop like most birds, so they don't have anywhere to like break down or crush bones like that, so they just spit them back up. And barn owls are actually the most widespread of all the owl species, and they're found on every continent except for Antarctica. And I believe they're found all over India except for like in the Himalayas. So it's kind of crazy that you'll see North American barn owls, but then you'll also see like barn owls in England. And while they are the same bird, they're same barn owls, they will have sometimes just a tiny bit different look. I've seen images of barn owls, say from China, that look a little bit more white than the ones from the US, and like the ones from England sometimes look a little darker, but they are all still barn owls. So it's kind of crazy that this one particular owl species has become that widespread around the world. And they're also very adaptable, so you'll find barn owls in forests, but you'll also find them in even urban areas, and they just adapt really well to pretty much anywhere in the world. And here I'm starting to lay in the gray feathers along the back. Along with this gray, they have like white speckling, and then some little tiny black feathers and some little tiny white feathers that all just kind of lay together. Now, for the sake of this being like a small oil painting and kind of a small demo, I'm not going to get too crazy detailed with this. Basically what I'm going to do is just kind of add in a subtle pattern, and with feathers you don't have to paint every single feather. I mean, you can if you want to go like hyper realistic, by all means you can paint every single feather you want. I've seen artists do it. It's amazing. If you let every single layer dry and then just keep going and keep building, and you can get some amazing details. And those are artists that also work on a painting for 6 months and things like that. I've been working on this painting for like 2 days, so I'm doing it kind of quick to just kind of get it done not for the sake of the demo, I guess, but just to kind of experiment with these oil paints and see how they work, and just go a little bit quicker. And also with oil paints, this is the first oil painting I've done in 20 years. So of course, with anything, you get better as you do it. I'm sure as I get more used to these water mixable oil paints and kind of get back into oil painting, I will, get into doing more detail and getting more used to like how the paint dries and layering. But for this one, I wanted to kind of keep it loose, kind of keep it where I didn't do a ton of little tiny details. But with birds and, with feathers, you can kind of do just a few feathers and your brain will kind of fill in the rest. And even in like photos, you're not going to, unless you're zoomed in on that photo all the time, you're not going to see every single tiny little feather, unless it's like a macro shot or something like that. Same goes for like scales on a reptile if you're painting a snake or something. By all means, you can. If you want to do every scale, you can. I just got done doing a painting of an alligator in oil paint, and I did every scale, painted every scale individually. Would I always do it that way? Not always. Sometimes I do it and kind of let your brain fill in the rest, but it's kind of, at this point, a matter of personal preference. But for this one, I do kind of, like I said, I leave it a little loose. I just kind of do a subtle indication of the feathers and the pattern. We'll go ahead and speed this up a bit. This is just laying down the gray still around the wing and blending it in. This is the second day that I've been working on this painting. And the first layer, the tawny and like the tan colors, were all still very wet, so it was very easy to blend the gray and everything into. So again, these water mixable oil paints are behaving just like regular oil paints. I really have seen no difference other than it does not take much water or much of the linseed oil to thin them down. That was really the only difference that I noted right away. But using the paints with just a little bit of water works just almost like a regular oil paint. Now it was later in the second day, the background as it was drying, it did become just a little bit tacky, which wasn't a problem because I was done with the background. I wasn't doing really anything for this one. I was just doing that solid black with a little bit of green in it. Nothing fancy for the background. Like I said before, now in hindsight, yes, I probably would have done an acrylic underpainting and done something probably different for the background. But with that being a little sticky to the touch, it wasn't a problem at all. Okay, and then we're going to speed it up here because this is just more blending in of the gray and the kind of tan color on the back. Again, the body color is still nice and wet, so these colors blend beautifully, no issue at all. And this has been left overnight, so this is typical drying speeds of oil paints. It just, again, I just keep kind of repeating myself, but it lays down just like normal oil paint. That I haven't really seen any different kind of feel or effect. I really thought these were going to be more like acrylics and kind of expected to, I don't want to say let down, but I thought the experience would be similar to what I'd had in the past, where either they started to dry and get sticky or dry like acrylics. And even my palette, the next day was still wet, and I was able to continue using my paint. That's one of the things I always love so much about oil paints, is you can mix up a lot of your color, and instead of having to stop and mix color continuously, you can mix a bunch on your palette at one time, and because it doesn't dry, or doesn't dry quickly, you can keep using that color and come back to it. And with acrylics, of course, you really can't do that because they dry so quickly. Now there are things like I have a stay wet palette for my acrylics, and that does help, and that works pretty well. and then that way you can kind of mix up a little bit more of your paint. But really with acrylics, the paint's going to dry so much faster, so you don't keep that nice wet palette. And then I'm going back over the gray and just getting a little bit darker. I'm looking at the reference photo and realized that it's quite a bit darker than my original color. Again, these paints, they do thin out a little easier. The only difference I've noticed, and being kind of aware of that when mixing my colors, the gray turned out quite a bit lighter because just a little bit too much water into it. So I go back and add a little bit more blue and pull it towards a still nice cool gray, but a little more blue to add it a little bit darker. I don't use a lot of black. Of course the eyes are black, and I did black in the background, but normally when painting I try not to use a lot of black. I try to mix in blues for my blues and purples and things like that for my shadows and for my darker colors. Now sometimes there are times where you will need black and just no other color will work, but in this instance using a lot of different blue to kind of tone things down. And with this Muse kit, the paintbrushes it came with, they're not bad paintbrushes, but with oil paints I always like to use natural hair brushes. Just it gives a better feel personally. I feel like that they hold more paint than the synthetic brushes do. These brushes, I've cut out a lot of it, but I feel like I was having to just constantly get more paint with these synthetic brushes, and just something about the way the synthetic brushes pushes the paint around. Synthetic brushes, I love them for acrylic and for watercolor, but I'm not a fan when it comes to oil paints. So going back to use these paints again, I will probably go back to my oil brushes that I have that are natural hair. And also with oil paints, I do prefer to use a longer handled brush. It's just easier with oil paints. It was the way I learned. Of course, again, it's one of those things, teaching art is kind of hard to say, oh, do it this way, do it that way, because everyone does things differently. But I find, it's a matter of personal preference. If you learn a certain way and that's the way you like it, then by all means, I don't think there's one way that should be, right. But the way I learned was to use a long-handled brush and kind of loosen up a little bit. And here, of course, I'm just speeding this up for a second. But the long-handled brushes, you don't feel quite as restricted, I guess you could say, and movements seem to be a little looser. And it also helps my wrist and arm not to hurt so bad when using the long-handled brushes, because instead of just moving just my wrist, I'm moving my whole arm. In the case of using these little short-handled brushes where I'm right up against the canvas, I'm only moving my wrist, and it does start to make my wrist hurt after a little while. So if you find when you're painting that your wrist becomes sore, or if your wrist starts to hurt, obviously other than wearing like wrist brace and icing your wrists and letting your wrists rest, which are all good things, try long-handled brushes. Try using a brush that's a longer handle and try holding it further back. You can kind of see here I am holding the brush further back. Don't hold it like a pencil, hold the brush further back, where you have more control that way too, and a lot of times that will help with pain. And I'm going to speed it up again. Now I'm going back and adding in more white, trying to get in some of those highlights. And again, these brushes, they're not bad. They're just not ones I would have personally chosen to go with oil paints. So I'll definitely want to paint some more with these and use my long-handled natural brushes. And this is just one of those parts of the painting where it's, you hear, trust the process. And this is definitely a trust the process, because it is just, building up layers. And I've cut quite a bit out for time's sake here to, so otherwise you'd be here just watching this painting for, several hours, because this was over 3 days, kind of split apart into, I think, about 4-hour painting sessions, sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on how much I could take. With my disability, I can't sit for very long, so I could only paint for a a few hours some days, and then some days I was able to paint a little bit longer. So this was spread out. And that's the nice thing about oil paints too. With oil paints, if you like to paint but you have to stop for whatever reason, oil paints, you can come back to it and the painting's still wet, and so you can still blend your paints. And it's just kind of a nice thing. And one of the things I missed about oil paints compared to acrylic or watercolor. And here I'm just adding more detail around the beak. It's got those little wispy feathers that are like fur, little fluffy feathers. And you can skip ahead if any of this is boring, because there's just a lot of going back and continually adding more and more layers and more buildup. And with oil paints, of course, if you let it dry and add more layers, you can get more and more detail. I'm going to go ahead and speed this up again, because this is more of the same, just more and more layers, and I really wish you could see it better, and I apologize because of my lighting setup. I did not realize just how glary this was. You just cannot see that white detail there. And here I'm adding, you can't even see it unfortunately, but there is a little hint of white in the eyes there to give it sort of that reflection, and doing the bottom eyelid there. And same on the other eye, just a little bit of a bottom eyelid and a little bit of that kind of glossiness to make the eye look round. It looks so much better in the end. This is I didn't think about this angle. I didn't think about the glare from the camera. And then adding in that brightest white highlight, which I always love doing that part, really makes the whole painting just come to life. And again, you can choose to do the eyes last. Some people like doing it that way so they don't get distracted by them. A lot of times I'll do them first, or in this case I just did it kind of in the middle. It's totally up to you on when you do that. And then going back and adding that bright highlight to the beak. And my camera does not want to focus. It doesn't know where to focus because that white of that owl's face is kind of throwing it off. And this is kind of the point where, you hear a lot of people say, trust the process. And that's the thing about oil paints. It is a lot of trusting the process. You can do a really loose, messy oil paint, but if you see these oil paintings that are like really detailed and, look very realistic, you've got to know that those were done with several layers and over several hours. That's nothing quick about oil paints. So if you're not patient, I would definitely recommend maybe trying watercolors or trying acrylic instead. Oil paints are one of those things that you got to have time for it. You've got to have a good spot to be able to set your painting. That's one downside is you really need, you don't necessarily need a studio, but you need somewhere safe where you can put your painting and you can leave it, because it's not going to dry for a while. And even after you're done with the painting, you might think it's dry, and it's still going to take it a while. Actual oil paintings do not fully cure. By most people's standards, they say about 6 months. That's why when you hear about people varnishing their oil paintings, which I personally don't varnish any of mine, I never have. Some people do, but people that do recommend waiting 6 months before you varnish an oil painting. And that's so to make sure that every layer is dry. So again, having a safe space, a good place to put it while it's drying is, kind of important. And I'm lucky that I do have a spot to put it. The downside is I have dogs and birds, and so I will notice when I go back and look at it, there will probably be, some pet hair stuck in there, and I'll have to pull it out and make sure it's not getting too dusty. Sometimes after a few days, when it's like dry to the touch, I can throw like a plastic bag over it or something like that to protect it while it continues to dry. Usually within like a week on average, depending on how thick you do the paint. Now it's going to vary. If you use a lot of liquid or a lot of linseed oil, it's going to take a lot longer, or it's going to be a lot quicker to dry, excuse me. If you use just straight paint and very thick, it's going to take a lot longer to dry. So depending on the style you're doing. Now with these water mixable oil paints, I really was surprised that it was kind of the same thing. I kind of thought these would dry faster than regular oil paints, but it took pretty much the same amount of drying time. It took this one about 3 or 4 days to be dry to the touch, or like just slightly tacky, and it took it about a week to completely lose that like really super glossiness everywhere. And now I might do a little bit of varnish just to the eyes to bring that glossiness back out. But when I was going to art school, we never varnished any of our oil paintings. That was probably more because of like time restraints, but you really don't have to varnish oil paints if you don't want to. But if you're going to do it, you really need to make sure that they're dry. Again, matter of personal preference. Do your research and kind of decide for yourself. It might be right for you, or your depending on what your oil paintings, if you're selling them to private collectors, or what you're doing with the final product. But I have oil paintings that I did 20 years ago that were never varnished that still look fine and had no issue. Now, when displaying oil paintings, one thing too, some people don't realize is you don't want to put them in a frame with glass. Now, of course, you can put a frame around the painting, but the reason you don't want to put glass on top of an oil painting is it can trap moisture. And again, if your painting is not completely dry, which since it takes so long for oil paints to dry, that can happen. You can actually damage the painting that way. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind too with oil paintings when displaying them. Now, don't know about the difference with the oils that I'm using here with the water mixable oils. I would imagine it would probably be the same thing would be recommended. I'd have to go look at Cobra's website and see what they recommend for displaying, and if they recommend varnishing this particular type of oil paints. But because it's still very similar, I would imagine because it is so slow drying, they probably would recommend that you don't put it in glass. But if you do put it in glass, they probably would recommend probably letting it dry for 6 months or something like that. But again, I'm not 100% sure on that. I would have to look that up. I'm going to speed this up again because it's more of the same. Just layers and layers. Here I'm adding more to the face and doing not really individual feathers, but building up more white in the face and there on the wing. And now that I've got that done, I'm going to go back in and add some of the little kind of scalloped feathers that are around the circle of the face, the little heart shape face that barn owls are so well known for. And I think it'd be kind of a fun series to maybe do barn owls from different countries, since, like I said, they're all the same species, but they kind of vary by locality. Which is pretty interesting. It's a pretty common thing for different animals to do that, and reptiles do it a lot, where you'll have locality-specific colorations and things like that. And so maybe it's something I can do, like, this here was a photo reference from a North American barn owl, but maybe I can get somebody, if you're in England or something, send me a photo of a barn owl in that area, and I can do a painting and try to do some barn owls from different countries. I think that'd be really fun, because even though I said same species, but they definitely do vary a lot by locality. And body shape can vary almost just a little bit too. I've seen some photos of barn owls that I thought were totally different species, like a Eurasian barn owl or something like that, and it's just a barn owl. It's just they look a little tiny bit different. But adding these kind of stiffer feathers down here, and again, I'm not painting every little tiny feather or every little tiny detail. I'm just kind of doing the outside edge, a little shadow, and just a few little sort of scalloped feathers around the edge, because they do have these stiffer feathers there that they can puff up and control. And if you guys like videos like this about me just kind of rambling about my painting and giving fun animal facts, let me know, and I can do more like this, definitely. I love painting, and I love talking about animals, even though I know my voice sounds really hoarse right now. I promise I'm not sick or anything. This is just how my voice has been sounding lately. But I really do enjoy fun kind of pointless animal facts. And then adding more white here. I really wish, I know I keep saying that, I did get new lights right after I got done with this painting, so it's going to make a big difference. In my next video, it will not be this glary, I promise. And you kind of see if my camera would focus right there in the middle. He's got that like kind of mohawk of feathers. And we're going to speed this up again because it's just more of the same. It's adding more details around the face and So here I'm adding those little black dot feathers. They're just little small feathers that kind of lay on top of everything that add just kind of another layer here. And the layer underneath is almost dry at this point. Not quite. It's just a little tacky. So if I were to take a larger brush and blend, I'd still be able to, but it's not as wet as it was. This is, I believe, the third day on this painting. And again, these are behaving just like regular oil paints. I do wish I had used a natural hairbrush though, because using these synthetic brushes that came with the kit, like I was saying before, not my first pick, and so I'm having to like constantly add paint to the brush and like reload the brush. But just doing the little dots down the back, and then eventually I'll put some dots on the wing and on the head, and then we'll go ahead and speed this part up. And here I'm just blending out the shadows just a little bit more, and the paint here is still wet, so I'm able to do a little more blending. And I'm also adding in just a touch more gray to kind of darken that entire neck area. And I'll go back in and add a little bit more white for some brighter feather highlights to kind of give this almost another layer of depth. And here I'm just blending in a little bit more lighter gray. It's really hard to see in the video, but we'll just speed this up for a sec because there's a little blending going on. And you can see here I've left the edges of the canvas white. I do plan on going back and painting the edges black or continuing the painting over onto the side of the canvas. And here I'm actually doing brush strokes to give it almost a textured look, to give more of the illusion of feathers there on the back. The paint isn't quite dry yet. It's, like I said before, it's kind of got like a little bit of a tackiness to it. So I'm going back with a little bit of the brown, a little bit of the grays to literally feather in the feathers. And then I go back with a smaller brush and add little dots of white. There's actually little tiny white feathers right along the edges of those little black feathers, creating these little white dots. So I add those, and then there's little tiny white speckling on top of the gray. So I kind of speckle that in, and again add just like a little bit of texture to give it the illusion of feathers. One thing in nature is almost everything has texture. There's very few things that are just absolutely smooth, especially when it comes to animals. Feathers and scales and things like that have lots and lots of texture. So if you're finding your painting just is lacking in realism, chances are maybe you just don't have enough texture. So it's a good idea to add that, even with like digital painting. One of the things I love to do with digital painting, if it's just looking too flat or not looking like a real creature, is to add some noise to the painting, and that really gives it more of a look of realism, look like something that's alive. And that's not to say that you can't find, something perfectly smooth in nature. It does happen. I mean, you've got, tumbled river rocks and things like that are smooth. It's just not that common. And when it comes to, like things like bird feathers, they're not going to be perfectly smooth. And so we're going to speed this up a little bit, but here I'm just laying down more of the little tiny white speckles that you see and adding in some additional highlights. Again, and not to use puns, but I'm feathering in the feathers at this point and just adding the little tiny dot feathers and little wisps here and there. And when it comes to the details and using a smaller brush, I don't switch to a small brush until the very, very end of the painting. I tend to try to use larger brushes. Now this brush set is a little different, and I probably would have not used a brush even this small until the very end. I did switch to a different brush set finally because the one that came with the kit didn't have a good detail brush. So here I switched to one of my detail brush sets to get the really just little tiny wispy feathers. And again, it's so hard to see in the video, but I'm adding in more of the tiny little fur-like wispy feathers around the face and just building those up more and more. And as the layers dry, I go back and add more layers on top of just tiny little white wispy feathers. And then around the little edges here, just adding little highlight feathers. And sorry if you can hear my birds in the background, they just woke up. But overall, again, this isn't really meant to be a painting tutorial, but just a review on the water mixable oil paints. And I've had a couple other people ask, like, what would be the advantages of these. And besides the fact that you don't have the harmful fumes from the additives like the paint thinners and things like that, there are some people that actually have allergies to oil paints themselves. Now, I don't know if these would affect you the same way. I would imagine that they wouldn't, because again, typically the allergens that people have, or the reactions people have to oil paints, are the actual solvents of, actually, when I was in art school, someone in my class actually had a pretty bad reaction to liquid, which is one of the thinners used commonly in oil paints. So she ended up having to switch to acrylics in the class. She tried wearing gloves at first, and that just didn't work. And so she had to completely go to acrylic paint. Now, I don't know if that she had... I don't know that these were readily available then, or if she had ever even tried water mixable oil paints. So that's another advantage if you have sensitive skin, or sensitive lungs. If you've got breathing issues, allergies, asthma, things like that, I would imagine that these would be much better for people that have breathing issues. So there's quite a few advantages to this. And then not to mention cleanup, because of course with oil paints, when you go to wash your brushes, you've got to use some sort of paint thinner. I typically use terpenoid, which is a lot better than turpentine. It is considered to be an odorless paint thinner, but even terpenoid is still a paint thinner, so it's still not good to breathe in. And I typically clean my brushes outside, but even then, it's you don't really want to get it on your skin. You can't pour it down the sink. But these, when I got done with the painting, I just went over to the sink and washed it with water and a little bit of soap and was done. So there's the cleanup benefit. Now, I don't know how, I haven't tested it, but I don't know how these clean up when it comes to getting it on something like, say, fabric or something like that. Obviously, if you get oil paints on your clothes, they're not washing back out. And I don't know if these clean up easier. And I'm sorry about my voice is horrible today. I don't know. I have good days and bad days, but today my voice just sounds awful. So here I'm just going back with a little bit of a darker color with my little detail brush, just kind of switching in between the two different brushes that I have that are for fine detail, and adding just little teeny tiny lines to separate those feathers. Again, I don't do every feather, I just hit a few targeted areas to add detail. And going around the feathers of the face, there are those little stiff feathers before, and then adding in more little wispy lines. And I think some people were kind of confused when I said this was my first oil painting in 20 years. They thought I meant this was my first oil painting, and it's not my first oil painting. When I say my first oil painting in 20 years, I mean this is my first oil painting since art school. I'm actually classically trained. That's what I went to art school for, was fine arts and oil painting. And while I changed kind of midway through art school and then ended up going for illustration, I did a lot of oil painting in art school. That's not to say that I didn't, kind of change and become self-taught, but I did oil paintings in the past, and then I stopped doing oil painting, like I said, because I went for illustration. So this is not my first oil painting. I just stopped doing it and kind of forgot how to do it. And then, this is the first time I've picked back up oil painting. So hope that kind of clears that up, that I had some people that kind of got confused by that and were, explaining things to me about how to do certain things. And it's like, I appreciate, critique and things like that, and tips and stuff, but it's not my first oil painting in 20 years, because I went to art school in the early 2000s, and then gave up art and became a zookeeper and worked as a zookeeper until I injured myself and didn't pick art back up for a little while. Then I focused on sculpting for many years, and so oil painting was an afterthought. I didn't do any oil painting. The only painting I did was the painting of my sculptures for a long time. So, and I did a little bit of illustrative work here and there, but my primary focus was on my sculpture line. So that's what I meant by my first oil painting in 20 years. So here, again, just adding tiny little highlights to really make those feathers kind of pop and look like they're lifting up from that shadow. And again, it's so amazing how they can manipulate every little tiny feather and lift these feathers up. And these feathers here on the face, they're very stiff, and it's so interesting because all the other feathers are very soft, and they have these like almost square feathers around their face. And if you guys would like to see me do some tutorials with the water mixable oil paints, let me know. And I'm by no means an expert, even though I did say I went to art school. Like I said, this is something I'm just getting back into, so you would be learning and experiencing things with me. I could share some tips and things that I learned from art school, but this would still be a kind of learning experience for all of us. So it'd be kind of a fun journey to take. But if you would be interested in seeing, some tutorials and different things, just comment below. And if there's certain animals you would like to see me paint, let me know in the comments. I'm always open to suggestions. I love feedback. I love to hear from you guys. Or if there's different art supplies and, various products you'd like me to test out or review, let me know, and I will get on that. I will go get the art supplies and give you my personal opinion, because I really find this, I know sometimes my voice doesn't sound too excited, but I really love doing this kind of thing. I love experimenting with new art supplies, and I have some other things planned. I've got some jelly gouache that I want to do a video on. Pan pastels is another thing I've always wanted to try. While I have tried oil pastels, and I love oil pastels, I've never tried pan pastels. Those just look like really fun. And then I keep seeing videos on the Hemi jelly gouache, and that stuff looks very interesting. And I do have some videos posted of my regular gouache paintings you could see. So here I apologize that my hand is casting a really bad shadow. I did get better lighting. It's not in this video, but I did upgrade my lights. So my next video, I promise the lights will be better, or at least the next video with those lights used, if that makes sense, will be much better. So just here adding more highlights, and we'll go ahead and speed this up because it's just kind of the same thing again. And here I'm just adding the brightest white highlights. And with most animals, you wouldn't really see anything quite this white, and I would really reserve pure white for just like a couple little specular highlights here and there, like in the eyes, and maybe somewhere if there was like a really shiny spot or something that was wet. But in the case of this, being that barn owls are very bright and almost white, and the reference photo was, very well lit, there is considerably more white in this than I would normally use. And so here I am using a lot more white than kind of what I'm used to. And so I'm just, again, building up more layers, and we're almost done, I promise. And if you've been here this long and you've watched through the whole video, then thank you for staying this long. And comment below what your favorite bird is. And here I'm just going back and cleaning up around the eye where a little bit of the shading and shadow was lost when adding in some of the white. I'm using just a really small detailed brush. I'll just add in a little bit of the wispy feathers and just really fine little hairs. And I know I said I wasn't going to paint each feather individually, but since the face, of course, is the main focus of this, I do add a lot more detail to the face and more detail to those feathers than I do to the rest of the body. So if you stuck around for this long, I was trying to think of another fun fact about barn owls, and one thing that's kind of cool is they are monogamous. So these guys mate for life, which is kind of neat. So here I'm just adding in the final highlights. But overall, the water mixable oil paints is definitely something I'm going to continue to use. I think I'm going to expand my colors that I have, and these are going to be a nice alternative to acrylic and an alternative to traditional oil paints, and something that I will be able to use around my birds and not have to worry about affecting them, because I do really like these. They feel just like oil paints. And so here is the final results. You can see a little bit better the detail here. And yeah, there we go. And sorry, I was going to film a whole outro for this video, but we went to Joann's and we bought a bunch of cool displays for art supplies. And so now all of my tables are currently being occupied by these displays until we get them set up. So yeah, I got the golden display, got the Posca marker display, and sorry, my art studio is a disaster right now. Sorry for the mess. If you guys want to see a new studio tour, let me know, because we're getting everything set up. But yeah, here's my table. It's covered in different pen displays and paintbrush displays. So we're gonna get that all set up. But thanks for watching.